Hello friends, welcome back to Dhari. We are discussing on AWS in 30 days. Till now, we have completed what is the history of cloud computing, what is AWS, how to configure EC2, what is S3, what are the basics of AWS. As a developer, we have to remember. Today we will be discussing on how to connect to S3 via C#.NET Core, how to upload a local file to S3 and how to download that. Without wasting time, let's jump into code. I know we all are waiting for this practical theory. This theory is going to be an end-to-end .NET Core theory. We will be writing each individual line of code to understand how to connect to AWS. So friends, be with me. This is going to be an interesting session. What are the prerequisites that as a developer I should know? This is going to be a layman class. I will be explaining how to download Visual Studio, which project template we have to select, what is AWS SDK, Software Development Kit, how to connect it to AWS via SDKs, host this application, connect via Postman and upload a file. So friends, be with me. This is going to be an interesting session. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe.
We will be discussing on AWS S3 with the C#.NET Core Web API. What we'll be doing today? We will be first understand how to download Visual Studio, select C#.NET Core API as my project template, install AWS SDK, configure AWS into Core, and then we'll upload a file to AWS S3. So let's start. What are the prerequisites that I should know? Let's understand about Visual Studio. Visual Studio is a Microsoft developed IDE, which stands for Integrated Development Environment, that helps developer write, edit, debug and build code. It can be used to create application for Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS and Android. On the counterpart, we have AWS SDK for .NET Core. The AWS Toolkit for Visual Studio is an extension for Microsoft Visual Studio running on Microsoft Windows, that makes it easier for developers to develop, debug and deploy .NET applications into Amazon Web Services. How can I download Visual Studio? We have to navigate to visualstudio.microsoft.com/downloads. Once you click on that link, we will be redirected to this page. Here we can see the latest edition is Visual Studio 2022. There are three types of editions: Community, Professional and Enterprise. Community is free, so we can go with Community download. Click on this link, you will be getting an exe. Double click that. Visual Studio will ask some prerequisite configurations based on system space and availability. Choose whatever are necessary and go ahead with installation. Now let's discuss on AWS SDK for .NET Core, that is Visual Studio. To download this package, we have to navigate to aws.amazon.com/Visual Studio. Once we navigate, we will be getting this page, AWS Toolkit for Visual Studio. So this is how the page looks like. Now in the download section, as such I have downloaded Visual Studio 2022. We have to click on this. Once I click on this download card for Visual Studio 2022, I will be redirected to a download page. Here click on this button to start the exe that has to be downloaded. As you can see, my AWS Toolkit package with an extension of VSIX is ready. What does VSIX stands for? VSIX extension is Visual Studio Extension Type. So once I download the Visual Studio, there may be certain extensions, certain packages that I have to integrate into my IDE. So this will get integrated into my IDE. Let's start installing this. We have to double click on this. It will open Visual Studio prompt and ask me whether I would like to go ahead with an installer. Make sure your Visual Studio IDE is closed. There you go. The installation is completed. We have now installed Visual Studio 2022 and AWS SDK. Click on this icon for Visual Studio to get open. So this will open the integrated dev environment. The very first step what Visual Studio asks is what kind of project would you like to open. I will go with a create new project, and I can find various project templates. Since we have already installed AWS SDK, now I got project templates of AWS. AWS Services Applications with Test Cases, AWS Lambda Project, .NET Core, AWS Serverless Application .NET Core, AWS Lambda Project .NET Core. We are discussing on ASP.NET Core Web API. So let's click on this project template. Make sure the language type is C#. Once you click on this project template, click next. It will now ask us to name the project. I'll go with AWS S3 Core Web API. And I have to specify the project location. Select folder, and now it asks me what framework would you like to go with. .NET 6.0 is now out of support, so let's go with .NET 8.0 and then click on create. Once I click on this, it will start creating the project template, the project environment. This process is called as scaffolding. Once the scaffolding process is completed, I am getting a prompt which says I can configure AWS Toolkit with my IDE, which has two options, Amazon Q and AWS Toolkit. I will enable both of them. I'll not go into that depth now. Let's start creating our own AWS and configuring it via .NET Core. Since the scaffolding process is completed, let us see whether my application is runnable or not. To do that, we have to click on this start icon. As you can see, once I click on the start icon, I am able to see my project name and the Swagger information, which has all the information with respect to my APIs. By default, when I select a project of kind .NET Core Web API, it will configure a weather forecast code snippet into my scaffolding process. Here I have some things which I can see how my actual payload looks like, what is the request that I have to send, what is the response I'll get. So these things are called as schemas. So my project is running as expected. Since my project scaffolding is completed, it has generated some templates, some components, some folders, and I haven't wrote any single line of the code yet. Means I haven't done any sort of development. So a pre-development project template is also called as boilerplate code. To integrate S3 with our Visual Studio or to integrate S3 with our web APIs, we need to create a bridge. We have to create some AWS IAM roles and an S3 bucket so that we can get access and leverage whatever things are necessary items that we have to go with. To do that, let's jump into AWS now. I logged into my AWS. Now I have to search for user, we can see users IAM feature. Click on this, we will be redirected to a user configuration page. As of now, there are no users in my configurations. I have to click on create user. I will go with Hari S3 admin as my username and then click on next. I have to set permissions. I will go with default permissions that are provided by AWS. So I'll click on attach policy directly. Here I have to search for S3 and we can see Amazon S3 full access. Select this one and then I have to click on next. As you can see, my configuration I have, this is the profile information which I am getting created for my S3 admin user. He will be having full access. If there are any tags which I have to add, I'll add, else not needed. So now my user is created. I have to click here and create secret access keys. To do so, I have to click on create access and then the system will generate some keys. Make sure that we save them. Now AWS will ask me what sort of access would you like to have, whether it is a CLI, local code, so on and so forth. I will go with local code. Select this confirmation and then click next. Now my access keys are created. Make sure we save them and click on done. As you can see, my access key is created. In our previous session, we have created our S3 bucket. To connect from our web API to this S3 bucket, we have to know the region where we have created. If you are not sure where our region is, click on S3. It will give us the list of buckets that we have created so far. I have this my project AWS bucket demo. Click this one and go to properties. Here we can find where my default region is. Copy this and save. So friends, my AWS configuration is completed. What I need to do now is I have to start connecting my web API to my S3. Let's do that. Now we have to create the bridge between these two. To do that, we have to connect via CLI to store our information and generate a JSON file. So to install CLI, navigate to CLI page within AWS and then scroll down, select Windows, click on this link. It will download the CLI. Double click and install this into our system. Remember, this is only one-time activity. Going forward, we don't have to do any sort of setup. There we go. Our CLI is installed. Click finish. Now let's go to command prompt. The first step is we have to see whether our CLI is installed rightly or not. To do that, we have to say AWS -- version. Now you can see it has prompted me with the version information, so my CLI is installed. Now I have to create a JSON file with secret keys. To do that, I have to say AWS space configure space -- profile and say my -profile. Then click enter. Once we click enter, it will ask me the AWS secret key and secret passcode which we have saved. Once I have provided my access key ID, access key secret, region, there is no need to specify default output format and press enter. It will now generate my AWS JSON file. But where is the location of my AWS JSON file? To do that, you have to copy C:\users you have to copy this, go to run, paste it here and say enter. You can see a .aws folder here. Click here and here is my config and credential file. First thing first, we have to install two packages from NuGet. To install packages from NuGet, right click on solution, go to manage NuGet packages and then click on browse. We have to install AWS SDK.S3, AWS SDK extensions.netcore.setup. So once the installation is completed, we are ready to start our code. Now let's go to Visual Studio and open appsettings.json. Here I have to configure my AWS. The first is I have to go with profile, and it's the profile name which I have given while creating my config files. Then second, it's region. This is my closest proximity. Now save this appsettings.json. So now I have my AWS S3 created, my user created, my profile created, I have my CLI, I have my SDK installed, I have my program.json ready and my app settings configured with default configurations. So now we have to inject our AWS services into my .NET Core container. To do that, let's go to program.cs. Here I have to inject my AWS services to this container. There are two things that I have to specify with respect to builder.services. Those are my AWS options and my AWS service, which is my client. Let us see whether my application is working as expected or not. To do that, click on run. I can see my application is working as expected, so my injection part is completed. Now let us create a controller within which we will be calling our AWS S3 services. To do that, we have to right click on controller, go to add and then say controller. Here we have to specify the file name. Select API controller and then say add. It will now prompt me for file name. I will give the file name as files controller. Once my files controller is created, I have to inject my AWS services into this controller. I will be going with private read-only Amazon S3 as my S3 client. Now I will Now let us create a constructor for this class. So I'll go with public class name wherein my IS3 is S3 and my S3 client is initialized. So I have now completed the injection part of my S3 client. Let us try to do a post operation where we will be uploading a file. I'll go with a post operation. So HTTP post upload, public async task iaction upload file async. This is not an error. All code path must return some value. That is the default error which we'll get. What I'm planning is this method will first accept a file and then bucket name. If any prefix that I have to provide, it will. By default, this is null in nature. So I will be going with validating whether my S3 bucket name exists or not. So if my bucket does not exist, see, if my bucket does not exist, then I will throw an error saying that bucket name not found. If my bucket exists, I have to perform the upload option. To do that, we have put object, which is a method within my AWS S3. I'll be going with where new put object request, wherein it has bucket name, which I'm accepting from here. Key is the file name. If prefix is not empty, then I'll go with the file name, else I will go with prefix. And then lastly, I have to provide input stream type. I will be going with an open read stream. With this, my put object request is completed. We have to now specify the request type. So my request type is content type of the file itself. Whether it is a PDF, doc or JSON, I don't want to specify individual content type. Let the system takes the metadata information from the file itself. Now let us try to upload the file. To do that, I have to say put object async with my request payload. And lastly, if the request is success, I will be sending a success message to the user saying that, hey, your file is uploaded. Let me put a breakpoint here and test the application. My application is running as expected. Now in my Swagger, I found one new controller with name files, which is post, and here it's asking me the bucket name, the prefix and the file which I want to upload. So let's try it out. I will be going with my bucket name, which is my -project -AWS bucket for demo. I don't want to go with the prefix. Now I will choose a file, say okay, AWS S3, which is PowerPoint, open, and then I'll click on execute. Now you can see Microsoft Hosting Services have found my AWS credential for the profile. The breakpoint got hit. Let us bucket exists or not. So it has returned me true because my AWS bucket existed. Now request, I have uploaded the file. Now let's see what my system says all about. There you go. Server response is 200. The file is uploaded successfully. Let us go to our AWS S3 and see whether my file is uploaded or not. So this is my AWS S3 bucket. I can see no objects here. Let me refresh this page. Bingo. There you go. Guys, we have successfully uploaded a file from a local box to AWS. In later sessions, we can discuss in depth how to create a bucket, update bucket information. We can create or delete bucket. Only condition is that to delete a bucket, all the files within that bucket needs to be deleted first. Since we know the upload process, we can work on the since now we know the upload process, let's do a homework from your side to download this file. If there is a put object, then there can be a get object also, right, to get the object. With this, our first practical AWS comes to an end. Friends, do like, share and subscribe. With a new beautiful concept, we will be meeting soon. Till then, take care and be happy. Jai Hind. Thank you.